Hello there, everybody. I'm Jay Frost, and I'm really happy to welcome you to another session of How to Raise, part of the Philanthropy Mastermind series. Before we begin, I want to thank our sponsor, Evertrue, which is a global leader, of course, in donor engagement and fundraising intelligence, helping nonprofits find, engage, and inspire their supporters. Many of you know that DonorSearch, which supported this series for nearly a decade, at the end of 2025, DonorSearch became a part of Evertrue. And we are excited to continue and expand this work together through Evertrue Studios. So again, our thanks to them. And we won't be talking about Evertrue or DonorSearch today unless our guest presenter happens to mention them for some reason. But if you'd like to learn more, you can check out our links in the chat. And I did see, and in fact, Jack, our producer, is noting it right now, that for some reason, our QR codes that you saw at the beginning and the end, are not functioning today. So our apologies for that, but you'll find it very easy to go ahead and take a click through the link that he is putting in the chat right now to take a look at that. And if you're watching this recording later, of course, you can always just go to donorsearch.net and learn all about not just DonorSearch's work and Evertrue's work, but also you'll be able to access I don't even know what the number is now, but definitely the last 3 years of our programming, and there's plenty of it. So, as always, this is a live program for those of you who are with us live. So I would love it if you'd go ahead and warm up the chat if you haven't done so already, and just say hello and which part of the country or the world that you're from, maybe which organization you're with. All of that will be very helpful to our presenter as she's sharing information with you today to help contextualize it for you. So do just join the folks there, and thank you, Lee and Dominique, and let me see, Katie and Joni and Sabrina, Melissa, Sarah, Veronica, Rebecca, wow, Audra, Jadine. It's really good to see all of you here, and also to see all these different places represented, different parts of the country, different parts of the world, and of course different organizations. Do keep using the chat. It's a great way for us to not just get your questions and integrate them into the conversation today, but also for you to meet one another. So we have these sessions, again, once a week in our series, but you may not run into all of your colleagues here that often. So this is one way you can get to know one another and your work. Now, at the end of the program today, you'll also find a quick little survey. And we would love it if you'd fill that out. I'm giving you a preview of that right now because while it only takes about 30 seconds to do, if you're like me, you might just log out of a webinar and move on to the next thing. I promise you this won't take any longer than that. It's a way for us to know what you want to see and hear as the series goes on, but also a way for you to tell us specifically what you thought about this session. And once again, if you're interested in the work of our sponsor, you can note it right there. And it does help us as we think about what we're programming, and it also lets them know that you're paying attention to this series as well. So thank you for all of that. Now, to today's program. That is why you're here. And that's Corporate Philanthropy 101, how nonprofits can work effectively with corporate donors. And our focus today is definitely practical. We'll see what nonprofits need to understand about the corporate environment, how corporate giving decisions are often made, how to time and frame each more effectively, how to present partnership opportunities clearly and concisely. There's a lot here, and I'm not going to read it all to you. You know that is why you are here. What I do want to do is give a proper introduction to our guest today, and that is Emily Zimmon, founder and CEO of An Enduring Legacy, who's just popping up on the screen right now. Hi there, Emily.
Hello.
Emily brings experience across nonprofit fundraising, community engagement, direct service consulting, and education. And before launching her firm, she served as the Chief Development Officer for Big Brothers Big Sisters of Cedar Rapids and East Central Iowa, where they are now having major thunderstorms, so cross your fingers for technical cooperation today. And she also held multiple leadership and frontline roles, for example, with Willis Dady Homeless Services, including that of Development Director. And today, through An Enduring Legacy, which she may or may not reference, but you can definitely check out. We'll make sure to include a link, once again, in the chat to her firm. Emily helps businesses give back with purpose by simplifying charitable giving, nonprofit partnerships, and volunteer programs. The rest, I'll leave to her. Please join me in welcoming Emily to the stage. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you for having me, Jay. It's such an honor to be here with everyone and all of you. I saw so many amazing places coming in from the chat and what looks like just incredible organizations. So, as I'm starting to share my screen, I'm actually going to ask everyone to jump back into the chat again. And this time, I want you to drop a number in. So, on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being zero experience, zero confidence, zero basically knowledge around corporate philanthropy, 10 being lots of confidence, feel super comfortable there. You think you've got this and we could trade places, which I'd maybe be open to do. Yes, start dropping. Okay. I am seeing numbers all across the board. So it looks like everyone, is in a different spot in their career, in their area. I've seen everything from 0 to 10s, a lot of 3s, 6s, and 7s, 25. Okay, Wendy, you're up. Um, I love this. I love this. This is absolutely an area where you can have a lot of knowledge, you can have little knowledge, and you can still be doing things right and or wrong or just different between every corporation. Really and truly, what I want to go through today is kind of taking everyone from where I stood when I worked with nonprofits and had more than a decade in fundraising, because I really truly thought I was a 10 or a 12. And then I moved to the corporate side, and honestly, I was kind of shocked about what was happening and the lack of knowledge I had in different areas. Not because corporations, were not caring or not giving for different reasons, or not because they weren't investing in communities the way that I thought they were, but just because there were so many things happening behind the scenes that I never saw and didn't know what was going on. And I'm so grateful Jay had everyone enter where you're from, because I do think this looks different across your ecosystem and the area where you are living and working. Because a lot of the times what happens is we have one corporation who kind of leads the way, since there are no best practices around corporate philanthropy yet, working on that. But this is kind of meant to be an overview. And today I just want to share some of the surprises that I found, and more importantly, what you can do about those if there's something you haven't thought of or seen before. So, what happens after you hit that submit button? One, we do a little chair dance. Like, I know you've all done it. I know we're all here. And of course, maybe a yell down the hall if you're in office, or a message to the team saying, it's been submitted. We did it. Cue the confetti and the celebration. A huge weight is off your shoulders. This is absolutely true, because from your perspective, hitting submit feels like completion. It's done. The grant is submitted. The request is submitted. The letter of interest has gone to the person it's supposed to. You've spent time, right? Refining the narrative, building the budget, aligning the team, hitting send, and then celebrating. Done. Finished. Complete. It's a huge accomplishment. But inside the company or the foundation, that moment is actually the opposite of completion. It is the beginning of a process. And a lot of the times that's a long, lengthy, complicated process. Your application doesn't land with them as a finished story. It lands as a starting point. And that now has to be interpreted, translated, discussed, and defended internally. And most importantly, and most often, it's probably not just being read by one person. It is potentially about to move through an entire system within that organization. And that system is what determines what happens next. So, before we talk about why strong organizations don't always get funded, or why you felt your application was spectacular or bad and it did get funding, right? All of the little intricacies that happen within our emotions when we either get the email saying, yes, you've been awarded, no, you haven't, or yes, and it's not as much as you hoped it would be. We need to kind of understand some of the more foundational aspects of corporations and what actually happens inside that system after you hit submit. Because once you see that, the outcomes start to make a lot more sense, and the way we think about how we're submitting our applications starts to change. So, inside the system, your application goes into something different. It's no longer just being read, it's being interpreted. In many corporations, foundation environments, your application may pass through an employee review committee, a community relations or CSR lead, HR or marketing. Depending on who's reading this and who's making the decisions, HR might be focused on employee engagement goals. Marketing might be focused on whether the branding is there and their logo is getting out. An employee reviewer might just be looking for something that clicks with them. And community relations and CSR have tons of intricate goals. You might even be in front of an entire review committee, which could include those first three or individuals from entirely different parts of a company. And even sometimes it's leadership or a board. Depending on the size of the company and the organization's input on philanthropy, you might be looking at a family board who's making the final decisions, even though you're talking to someone else completely throughout the process. And here's the key insight. Each person reads it differently. Not because they're doing anything wrong, not because you are doing anything wrong, but because they're all bringing those different lenses, right? I talked about employee engagement, brand alignment, but community impact, budget responsibility, internal strategies, those marketing and branding goals. So your application becomes less like a straight line decision, like we like to think it is, and more like a shared translation exercise. Every translation from each of these individuals involved creates opportunity for clarity, or for confusion. And that's why clarity isn't just helpful in this process, it is what holds the entire process together. So what this means for you, you are not just writing for the funder. You are not just writing for the person who you have maybe had coffee with or been emailing back and forth with. You are writing for multiple internal audiences with different priorities who must all agree upon the same interpretation together. How to confirm this organization you're applying for and what this looks like inside their system. If you have someone that you are talking to and you are comfortable asking some of these questions, this can definitely help drive how you are writing your application, your letter of interest, or your proposal to a corporation or a corporate foundation. These questions are really focused on how you can create clarity in a way that is truly going to drive everyone to have the same understanding. Now, part of what I do is help corporations review applications, manage their corporate giving programs, and ensure that they're meeting strategic alignment. So I've really had the opportunity with an enduring legacy to shift from that nonprofit lens to that corporate lens. And I was kind of surprised to see how many applications were coming in lacking some of that clarity. So one of the key things that I recommend to everyone is to have someone else read your application, and not someone internal, someone who's not as familiar with the work that you do, who might be able to come back and tell you whether this is clear or not, because clarity should be your baseline non-negotiable. Unless you have confirmation that only one person is looking at and making final decisions on giving, and you know exactly who that person is and exactly what they know about you, clarity is key. Next part, one of the biggest mindset shifts from the corporate side. Most nonprofits assume decisions are primarily about strength of mission or quality of work. But internally, there's another filter happening that is just as important, which is, can someone inside this company confidently explain and defend this decision? Because again, the person reviewing your application is rarely the one voice in the room, and a lot of times they have those competing factors. They often have to summarize your work in a meeting, and a quick meeting, because we know people in corporate worlds are busy, just like people in the nonprofit world are. They have to justify the recommendation comparing you to other options, right? A lot of the times, if there's a committee reviewing these, there's people having discussions around them. Explain budget decisions, align with leadership priorities. These are all things that one person might have to do or a group of people have to do to move you to the front of the list of really wonderful organizations who are all applying for funding. Because as we know, corporate budgets tend to be tight, and they're tighter right now than they have been in some time. And so you are needing to not only put a good application forward, but have one that someone can defend. Because even strong organizations can lose momentum when the story is too complex, the budget doesn't clearly connect, the program isn't immediately understandable, or the request is hard to explain in one breath. And it's not because the work isn't strong, but because it becomes hard to carry internally. So, what does this mean for you? Your goal is not just to be compelling. Your goal is to be easy to understand, easy to summarize, easy to defend internally, and easy to align with priorities. If your application requires translation, a Google search, an AI request for additional information to explain, inside the company, friction is going to be created, and that's really going to cause some downdrafts that might make it hard for you to be awarded funding. If it's already clear and simple, you become easy to champion. One thing that I've learned in transitioning from nonprofits to running my own business is that I need to be able to say what my business does in an elevator pitch in less than 30 seconds. And not only what I do, but make it land so someone wants to continue connecting with me or set up a call to learn more. Now, that's a skill in and of itself, I have to say, and something I worked really hard at getting better at, but I think the same is true when it comes to nonprofits and applications to corporations and corporate foundations. The ability for someone to immediately say, X, Y, and Z does this, and have that be simple and understandable is huge. So to understand whether this is clear enough and how to confirm this, again, if you're comfortable talking to someone, if there is even an email or person available to answer these questions, you might want to ask anything along these lines that leads to who actually reviews these applications internally. What do the leadership team needs to see? If there are guidelines and summaries, emphasize those. Observe these questions to make sure that clarity is there. This is what's truly important to making sure that your proposal can move forward within that company. Because the real reasons great organizations don't get funded, it's rarely about quality, it's about fit. It's about that clarity and then that understanding. Because once you understand the internal system, the next question naturally becomes, if strong organizations are getting reviewed, why don't they always get funded? And the answer is uncomfortable, but it's important. It is very rarely that the organization isn't strong enough. More often, it comes down to clarity and fit. That means if you're clear, let's assume you have this rock star application, people understand it without any issues, you're down now to the next step. Does this fit? That means, is the budget already allocated elsewhere, or is this something that fits within the dollars available this year? The company has prioritized different issues maybe than they have in previous years. I think we all experienced this with the pandemic when all of a sudden companies shifted whatever their prior funding strategies, values, visions were to emergency services, which at that time made sense, but now it's a question of what is it today? What does it look like? And are those priorities still the same? Sometimes the timing of the request doesn't match the funding cycle. Ensuring that you know and track what each corporation's funding cycle, what their budget year is, do they function on a calendar year, do they function on a different timing, and when do they want those requests, if they don't have a set grant calendar, is so incredibly important for everyone. Or the proposal doesn't align tightly enough with the current strategy they're looking at, or again, it isn't clear for that internal champion to carry it forward. A strong organization can do everything right and still not always get funding. Again, not because you failed. Trust me, I know that you are all here, which means you are all caring, amazing individuals. It's a lot of the times about the trope. It's not you, it's me, right? Like imagine I'm a corporation saying that to you, but that's honestly really true, right? Because maybe it just wasn't the right fit at that moment inside the company. And I get that this is a time to feel really frustrated when you know you put this rockstar application forward, you know your letter of interest checked all the boxes, and you feel like you're a fit at that time. But from the corporate side, it's often not a question of merit. It's just that question of alignment. And they're just like there are so many people playing roles in this a lot of the times. The fit might not always be fully transparent on a website or through a conversation. So that is your first job. It is to assess fit. Before you invest heavily in a proposal, your first job is not to write. Strong fundraising starts far before the application. I think we all know this, whether we work with individuals, families, foundations, or corporations already. But we also sometimes try to fit that square peg in that round hole because we really want to either go for funding to help us match or meet our budget, or because we have an expectation of us from a supervisor, an executive director, or a board to submit X number of applications every month, quarter, or year. But really and truly, if your organization or your program does not fit with the corporation, that sometimes can be a waste of time. And that's very hard to explain to others who aren't the ones writing it. But I do encourage people to have that conversation if there's something that doesn't seem like it's going to match up, or at the very least, trying to contact again to ask some of those questions I talked about earlier. Right? Because when you have understanding of where does the company give, what do they prioritize, how do they define impact, and what timing they operate on, that is some of the most important things you can have before you even start writing that application. And always, if it's a grant application and they have access to it early or through a portal, go through all those questions before you start writing. Make sure that you are set with everything that you may need. And if you need additional documentation from someone, you're accessing it as quickly as possible. Now, how to confirm this organization you're applying to is going to be a good fit. Look for signals, if you don't have that person to talk to, about funding priority areas on their website. Look to see if you can find recent grants or sponsorships that have been awarded. Look for language within CSR or ESG reports. Are there themes in press releases or impact reports that might tell you align? Is there a recurring focus area for them year after year? And if your work doesn't show up in those patterns, you may be asking a company to stretch beyond its current strategy. And that is a much harder win. I also want to say I've worked with a corporation before who had differing values when it came to giving and volunteering. Volunteering for them was very open. It was based on the interests of their employees, whereas their philanthropic giving pillars were specific and different. And so they would have nonprofit organizations apply to them because they saw the volunteer locations they were going to, and they aligned with those, but they did not in fact align with the giving and the fit there. So having those conversations is important. And again, if they're volunteering, what a great entry to have them come in and get connected that way too. Your strongest applications are the most aligned. This is really and truly the practical turning point. Once you understand that fit drives a large portion of decisions, your strategy can change in a way that's beneficial. Instead of starting with, here's our program, will you support it? You can now start with, here's what you care about. How does our work align with that? And begin talking about those programs. Bringing 1, 2, 3 ideas if you're going into a conversation to ensure that you're prepared to answer those. And if you're putting forward a proposal, knowing what best aligns based on those previous topics I just talked about. And the shift sounds simple, but it changes everything about how you approach corporate partnerships. Because now you're not trying to convince someone to care, you're trying to just connect with them and build that rapport. And that's a very different conversation, right? It also changes how we prepare before we apply because we begin to study the funding patterns and understand the stated priorities. We look at who this corporation has funded before and we identify overlap before writing, before taking time and hours to do things. And that only allows us to pursue opportunity where alignment already exists. And that's how you move from hoping for funding from corporations and how to work with them to positioning for it. Because if you come across a corporation or a foundation who a clear fit for them is someone who's going to function as a partner, who's bringing their logo forward for sponsorships or different opportunities, that's going to look very different than a corporation whose logo you don't see anywhere, right? They are looking for different aspects. And the more you know that, the more comfortable you can be in what you're submitting. Because your strongest applications are not the most persuasive. They are the most aligned. Alignment reduces friction, and reduced friction increases the likelihood of approval. Note, this does not mean that you build programs for corporate sponsorship opportunities. This means that you find areas that align with their interests and apply accordingly. Your program should be what best align with your constituents and those you serve and the communities you work in, not what a corporate giving program looks like. So don't create new programs. I know sometimes it's tempting. I am also a shiny squirrel person. And so I always have to keep myself in check of, am I finding the right fit within what we're doing? And, or do I need to table this for the future when we might be a better fit for this organization? So when you're looking at, are you aligned? How do you confirm this at an organization? Ask some of these questions if you're able to. Look for some of these answers. Review their giving history. If 80% of funding goes to a few categories, that is your roadmap. That is not a suggestion. If they mainly fund food organizations that support food insecure populations and you work with animals, they might not be the right fit, and vice versa. Right? So figuring those things out and ensuring that you can have alignment with them. Now, even strong applications break down in kind of one predictable place, which is the story itself. Now we're going to get into one of the most practical breakdown points in corporate philanthropy applications, where even strong organizations lose clarity for one simple reason. They assume familiarity. They assume the reviewer already knows what their programs are, what their acronyms mean, what their target population is, what success looks like in their context, and how their services actually work. But in corporate philanthropy, that assumption almost never holds because the person reading your application may not work in your field at all. So when they see internal program names, acronyms without definition as shorthand for services, or references to our model, they are forced to stop and interpret. And every moment of interpretation loses clarity and introduces friction. Now, this isn't because the person reviewing your application isn't capable, it's because they shouldn't have to translate your organization in order to evaluate it. What this means for you, you have to remove insider language from your external narratives. That means you have to spell out acronyms the first time someone sees them. You need to replace internal program names with descriptive language. Assume no prior knowledge of your organization. Describe problems and solutions clearly and concretely, and define what your programs actually do, not just what they are called. Instead of, we deliver services through our ABC program, say, we provide job training for unemployed adults through a 12-week workforce readiness program. The difference is clarity and sophistication. I might not know what ABC program is, but I can easily understand a 12-week workforce readiness program for people who are currently unemployed. Instead of saying participants are enrolled in our HOPE initiative, say we support low-income families with housing stability services, including rental assistance, eviction prevention support, and case management. Instead of our youth engagement model focuses on holistic development, say we provide after-school tutoring, mentoring, and mental health support for middle school and high school students. I could go on and on and on with examples. The biggest thing here to know is that in corporate philanthropy, translation is often the difference between being quickly understood and moved forward or being set aside for clarification. Goes back to an earlier point where I encouraged you all to think about having someone outside of your organization who does not have a great understanding of what you do or the population you serve, reviewing a letter of interest, a grant application, or a proposal. It is incredibly easy when we live in this world day in and day out to assume that everyone understands the phrases and the wording that we are using. I think regularly about ACEs, right? Most people are like, oh yeah, adverse childhood experiences. I not only know that acronym and what it stands for, but I know what that means. There might be a ton of you, by the way, on this call who are like, what? Because you don't work with the vulnerable populations with youth and adults in the same way. And that's 100% the exact point I'm trying to make is even if I explain that acronym, it still doesn't tell anyone what that actually means. It is easier and more clear to just lay out what you are talking about. In fact, it might seem like you're dumbing down an application to some extent, but I hate that phrase because what's happening is you are making your application sophisticated for anyone who is reading it, regardless of their background and knowledge. When clarity breaks, even strong applications get stuck. Once you understand how easily insider language can creep into applications, the downstream effect becomes very predictable. Because inside corporate philanthropy, clarity is not just a communication preference, it affects movement. When an application is unclear, reviewers often don't reject it immediately, they pause it. And the reasons are usually simple. I'm not sure I understand this program. Can someone clarify what this acronym means? Which population are they actually serving? How does this connect with what we fund? And to Callie's point, thank you in the chat, it is educating people, right? It's providing that opportunity for individuals to understand exactly what you're doing and removing that delay. Not because your organization is weak, but because the application requires additional interpretation before it can move forward. And in corporate environments, delays matter. Funding decisions are often quick. They're usually tied to budget timelines, committee cycles, leadership approvals, and competing priorities. And so if you are one of 150 applicants and someone has to put it to the side because they're not sure what you're talking about, your application might never get picked up again. And that's a really hard space to be in. So clarity is just about being understood. It directly affects whether your application keeps moving or if it stalls. So your job is to make understanding immediate, educate people, define every program in plain language, avoid internal shorthand, describe problems and outcomes clearly. I'm sure as most of you put in, you're in larger communities. I live in Iowa. We're pretty small communities across the board, but no individual is going to have a completely understandable recognition of each and every single problem that exists within our community because they're also looking at tons of applications for different areas. And that's even if they're just geographically focused to a local area where I am. You need to tell them what the problem is that you are solving and supporting. You need to connect every initiative to that real world impact and remove anything that requires explanation outside the document. If someone can read your application once and immediately explain it to someone else, you've reduced friction. If they can't, your application is going to slow, if not stop. Now, I know to some of you, this may seem clear and obvious, but there are many, many times where we accidentally slip back into utilizing jargon, acronyms, and words that just don't fit. I remember reviewing an application where the organization kept referring to one of their core programs throughout the entire narrative. It came up constantly. It was clearly central to their work and to the funding request, but something felt off as I was reading it, because they would say things like, the impact is driven through our XYZ initiative, which has grown significantly over the past years. Or this expansion is supported through XYZ initiative's program model. And they just kept going. What they never actually did was explain what the program was, not in a clear way, not in a concrete way. And by the way, even if you do think you have a very solid relationship with the person who is reviewing this, and there is only one, it's worth re-explaining some of that stuff again, because they don't know it as well as you do. So even though it feels repetitive, it might not be. So in this scenario, I found myself trying to figure out incredibly basic things. What does this program actually do? What does someone experience if they're in it? What services are even included? What changes because this program exists? None of that was spelled out, and I found myself scrolling up and down within this application because I couldn't find what I was looking for, and I shouldn't have to do that, because that created friction for me as a grant reviewer and created a time where I was ready to just put it down. And it wasn't that the work itself wasn't strong. In fact, it probably was, which is why I scrolled back and forth for a little while before I gave in. But the programming wasn't being described. They thought the name of the program was sufficient enough, but I had never heard of it because I wasn't familiar with their organization. And what happens in that moment is subtle. You don't reject it immediately, but you start to lose clarity. And once you lose clarity, everything else takes time to interpret, and eventually it falls to the side. Another key point that I want to make when it comes to clarity and having to look and understand things is budgets. This might seem clear to a lot of people, but your budget is a communication tool. When we get to one of the most overlooked parts, people kind of just upload what they find. And the number of times I have gotten the wrong thing uploaded is pretty dramatic, one. But this thing that we look at and kind of skim over as we're doing it is so important, because this is where everything we've talked about shows up in a really concrete way. Your budget is not just a financial document, it is part of your story. And more importantly, it is often one of the first places a reviewer checks to see if your narrative holds together. Because inside a corporate or foundation review process, someone is asking, does what they say they will do match what they say it costs? And can I understand this quickly, right? Like, again, back to clarity. Can I look at this budget and easily understand this? This is where a lot of strong applications unintentionally create friction. If you are doing X program to accomplish Y and your budget should be Z, but it's JKL, I'm going to spend time being confused and then potentially put it to the side. And sometimes that's not even because the numbers are wrong, but because the format is internal facing instead of external facing, or because the budget just doesn't work with what you're trying to fit. This is, again, where it comes back to do not create something to fit a corporation, but find something that fits with them. So what this means for you, a strong facing external budget is board approved, clean and readable, aligned directly to the request, and easy to connect back to the narrative. A weak external facing budget is full of full accounting export. It's line item detail that doesn't connect to the program. It's internal codes and categories. There's no clear tie to the funding ask. And when that happens, reviewers have to do that extra work to interpret it. I once reviewed, a number of grants, 150 of them for one organization. And like many corporate or foundation processes, we didn't start with the full narrative review. We started with eligibility and the budget. Did those two things fit? Because before I'm going to read everything else, I need to ensure that you actually qualify for the program I am making recommendations on funding for. And that meant we were quickly asking, is this within the funding scope? Does it align with our priorities? Does the budget match what we fund? And is anything unclear at a high level? And I remember a specific situation where a proposal never actually made it to the full review, not because it wasn't strong. Actually, I don't know if it was strong. We didn't even get past that, but because at the early stage, what I saw was a 135-page full QuickBook report. That was something I was not going to be able to go through in a very fast space, especially when I had 150 applications to go through. It was easier to eliminate than to deeply investigate. And again, if there's friction, we just move on. I never got to see the story. I never got to the impact. I never even knew what the programming was based on and what they were doing. And that was a real shift for me because it reinforced something important. Before your story is ever even evaluated, you have to pass the clarity and eligibility filter that determine whether your story gets read at all. And those are incredibly important things. But again, the budget is something that we often look over. We just upload it quickly. We don't verify that it's the board approved outward facing budget that should go to external partners, and we accidentally upload the internal one. We upload the one from previous years. We upload a full QuickBooks report. If you don't have an external facing budget, I highly encourage you to make one and make it look nice and easy to read. It is not that hard, and I promise you it is worth your time. Because the goal is not a better application, it is a clearer one. There's one thread running through everything we talked about today. It's this. Most nonprofits are already doing meaningful work, important work. The challenge is not effort and it's not intent, it's translation, it's clarity. Because once your application enters a corporate or foundation environment, it has to move through so many different systems that depend on being clear, aligned, and usable internally. And those systems reward something very specific. Not the most complex applications, not the most detailed application, but the one that is easiest to understand, explained, and defend internally. That is what creates momentum. That is what creates confidence. And that's what ultimately leads to funding decisions moving forward. So if you take nothing else away from today, take this, please. Before you ask, is this compelling enough? Ask instead, is this clear enough to carry through a decision-making process that I will never see? Because when the answer to that is yes, everything else gets easier. Great partnerships don't come from better applications. They come from better alignment, clear communication, and shared understanding. And when those three things are in place, corporate philanthropy stops feeling unpredictable and stops feeling like a partnership, starts feeling like a partnership. Ooh, mixing up my words, which is a good thing. We're at the very end then. So thank you so much to each and every one of you. We are going to shift over into some Q&A here. Again, my name is Emily Zimmon. I am with An Enduring Legacy. I think we'll drop some more information in the chat. But Jay, great to have you back. I'm going to stop sharing, so it's just you and me on this screen.
Thank you so much, Emily. Really appreciate that. And I know that there are going to be questions here. In fact, we already have a few in the Q&A. We're going to look there. We'll look in the chat. Do post your questions. I did see one that was specifically about the series, and if we cover this topic from different angles, the answer is yes. Can I tell you which ones right now? I wish I could, but we've done 850 programs and my memory is not that extensive. What I can tell you is if you'll write to me individually about something that you'd like to see and hear and wonder if we've done it before, you can contact me at j.frost@evertrue.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn or however you'd like. And I'll be happy to try and help with that. But you can also see a lot of that content on YouTube. just as this recording will be on YouTube. So this is, I'll take just a minute, Emily, while people are storing up their questions, to tell you a little bit about what's coming up next. And the first thing that's coming up next is that you're going to receive, if you're here with us live, you're going to receive an email with a link to this recording, so you can share it with colleagues or refer to it if you've missed a section. And in addition, there will be a link to the slide deck that Emily shared. So that'll be helpful to you.
Absolutely.
Now, if you want to see the content that we have going forward, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's all of the episodes that we're doing currently of How to Raise, this program for CFRE credit, by the way, but also our Frontlines of Social Good program, and the PM podcast is also available there. So do check that out and subscribe. It's a way to make sure that we can continue getting the generosity of our sponsor, but it's also a way to make sure you don't miss anything that maybe you didn't have time to attend live. Now, here's a quick look while you're, again, writing those questions down at what's going to be coming up next in the Philanthropy Mastermind series. First of all, the PM podcast is currently featuring interviews with all of this year's AFP award winners. It's the Association of Fundraising Professionals. You can check that out wherever you like to listen, or again on that YouTube channel. And you'll see a link to the YouTube channel in the chat. I know Jack, our producer, will be putting it there. Next Wednesday on, again, this program, How to Raise, Catherine Puzer, Director of Planned Giving at the Cancer Research Institute, will join us for a practical guide on to optimizing the silver tsunami. If you don't know that expression, it's referring to all the people who are, well, getting a little older, and they're going to be the major factor in what's referred to often as the Great Wealth Transfer. So she'll be talking about what it means for your annual, mid-level, major, and planned giving programs to benefit from, of course, that wealth transfer. And mark your calendars for our annual review of the new Giving USA results on Wednesday, June 24th, with a number of top leaders in the field, including the chair of AFP. Now, I've talked enough, so let's look at the questions.
Yeah, I actually have an idea, Jay.
Yes.
So I've seen a few questions come in where people are asking for the best sites, links, kind of connections to find corporate giving and grant programs. I would love others to actually drop in the chat the programs that they use, because I've used a bunch of them. I know that there's a ton of programs out there, and sometimes it's worth having access to multiple. Sometimes it's worth sharing or talking to your local public library about if they'd be willing to invest in some of those. But I think, finding corporations and some of those things. And Jay, I'm sure you have an idea on some good ones as well.
We've done a lot on that. And in fact, I spent a lot of time, especially in the research part. So DonorSearch is a resource if you're talking about identifying companies that maybe have a similar interest, and then learning more about it. Certainly the people at Candid, which is, some people may know it as Candid, but it previously, of course, would have been known as the Foundation Center, as a component of that, but also GuideStar, which looks at the 990 data. So that can tell you something also about where those folks are. There are other resources as well, and if you'd like to reach out to me directly, I'm happy to share any and all of that with you. There are a whole bunch of resources that might be helpful.
And check the chat, because I think some people are dropping some in here, hopefully, which is, again, there's some that I have just never heard of that sometimes are some of the best options. I know we're limited on time, so let's dive into some questions here. I see one from Rochelle. Thank you. She says, what is your recommendation to maintain clarity when the application space is limited? I actually, personally, when I'm writing grants for nonprofit organizations, I kind of love a limited character space, because it means that I have to be incredibly clear. There is no room for fluff, which takes away that clarity, which, by the way, AI adds a lot of. So if you are utilizing AI when you are doing grant writing for corporations, I encourage you to ensure that the fluff is removed and you are following just best practices in grant writing. But that really can be an opportunity to just kind of strip everything down and be as clear as possible. It does get hard sometimes, and unfortunately, corporations, foundations, grant makers don't always realize they're asking 5 questions and giving you character counts for 2. However, if you do have the ability, that's kind of a good challenge to start diving into all the things that I was actually talking about. So that would be I'd say just embrace the challenge, I guess, and be as clear as possible. It also might challenge you to say, I need to be really focused on which specific program I am talking about that fits with this organization. A lot of the times we want to talk about everything we do for good reason, right? We're proud of it. Our organization's doing really incredible work. But if we have 5 programs and I'm applying for one and I have a very limited character space, I might say, like, this is the main program. We have additional that also support XYZ and leave it at that, right? Because that's not always what's going to get you to a funding decision. And in fact, talking about all that you do, unless it's asked for, can sometimes drive more friction because you're losing that clarity on the program that's actually being funded or the request is being made for. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make a note, especially for those who are watching this later. This audience is being so helpful to one another. And so before we talked about resources, and people have listed a whole bunch, and a couple that I didn't mention, I don't think you did either, were Grant Station. And I think Instrumental is another one, Cause IQ, Impala. So I'm just mentioning those because, first of all, we want to be, generous in mentioning all the different resources that are available. But also, I'm just really impressed with how much you're helping one another. Please.
Great community. Yeah. And honestly, the University of Iowa here in Iowa City, Iowa actually has their own list of grantors, including like individual donors who have foundations. So you'd be surprised what you can find by Googling your local communities. I recommend talking, as well to your community foundations. Do they have lists of funders? I worked previously, in Minnesota, and their local community foundations had one as well. So relying on, local as can be beneficial too. So nationwide and local, absolutely. I see a question here from Dr. Sandy Range. How do corporations, if at all, work with young or grassroots nonprofits? And is there anything we need to know to become more appealing? I think in this case, it is always harder to get funding when you are new or you are grassroots, like across the board, because you are having to show how you are going to make an impact when you don't have that consistent historical information to really be able to talk about and translate. But it's not impossible. And in fact, a lot of times corporations are the right space to go to because they don't always have the same kind of limitations that other locations will have. But it's really figuring out if you're going to be a fit. And it's talking to them about being kind of a big drop in a small bucket, regardless of the size of your request there. Their money and impact might go a lot farther because you're doing things as a newer organization and helping build that sustainability. You're just going to have to be really clear about why this is needed, why it's something that no one else is doing, because a lot of corporations do not want to fund 2 organizations that are doing the same work in the same community, and how that impact is really going to be seen. So I think you have great opportunities there. It's really going to come down to that fit. Hey, next great question that kind of plays into that. Jay, I think maybe last one, or where are we at time-wise? You tell me.
Yeah, I think we have time for a couple more.
Okay. So Wendy asks, what do you recommend if you see that an organization is partnering with similar organizations, but they never respond to your outreach? Does that mean they are just not interested, or is it not the right person? This is honestly going to change across the board. Every organization has different scenarios, but when I talked about who this process goes through, a lot of the times the first in a corporation is someone who has this as an additional duty assigned on top of their 40, 50, 60 hour a week jobs, right? It's usually an executive assistant, marketing, HR. I have seen everything from manufacturing, second shift floor managers through to like anyone you can imagine, including like the president of a major bank. So they might just lose this information. They might not see your email. They might not even know it's there. It can be very hard to do that. It's where I encourage, if you are in a situation that you can go to networking events and network in person with some of these people and get an in or a connection, even if it's not the person you need to talk to, but it's someone who can do that warm handoff for you, that can make a huge difference. And yeah, maybe they are not responding because they're not interested. And I hope that's not the case, because we would like to believe that everyone is going to say, sorry, this just doesn't fit with us. But again, that overwhelm might be at a point where they're like, this is too much for me to deal with and respond to. So they just put it to the side and then it falls off, which again does happen. So I'd encourage finding those connections. They're also incredibly beneficial in most applications. Being able to say, X volunteers with us, Y serves on our board, Z is a, ongoing donor, or they're able to be those people kind of advocating for you within a corporation. Those connections go so much farther than most of us ever think possible. Yeah.
I know this is a flood of terrific questions. This is good lightning round question. What role does social media play in soliciting corporate funding, if any?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it really depends, right? I think are you offering it as sponsorship? Is that what your goal is? Or is your goal just getting your social media in front of people? And then is it making that connection as an in to the corporation or to the right person? I think social media is spectacular when you're able to utilize it to draw attention and create those partnerships with corporations, especially in sponsorships. And to get, volunteers, people as donors, that initial, it's probably not going to be great unless you're absolutely targeting the right person. Right. I saw a very funny video not that long ago about these two guys who started a company, and they knew the person who was the decision maker who could decide if they were in. They purchased 5 billboards, full billboards, in his route from home to work. They didn't put billboards anywhere else. They were only targeting him. So unless you can do that with your social media, which most of us can't, then focus on hitting those bigger numbers and providing that as a platform for that corporation to get their marketing and branding out.
This has been terrific, Emily. Thank you so much for all of this. I know you could keep going, and I know that our audience would love to keep asking. So how can people find out more again about your work, reach out to you if they want? What's the best way?
Absolutely. I think my information has been dropped in the chat a couple of times, both to my website and my LinkedIn. You are more than welcome to reach out to me either way. There are a few different contact options on the website that get an email over to me, or LinkedIn works as well. I just look forward to, being connected and seeing all of you in the amazing work you're doing. So please send a request to connect regardless of whether you have an additional question, because I love seeing and cheering on and championing what other people are doing too. And follow Jay.
Thank you so much, Emily. Really great having you to share all this today. And I'm so glad the weather did not interrupt what you were trying to share.
For like a millisecond and came straight back on, and we were good. So
we're very lucky. Yes. And thanks to all of you once again. Thank yourselves as well as Emily here for being such great participants in the conversation today. Really do appreciate that. I'm sorry we couldn't get to every question. Please join us again, and again, look toward the YouTube channel to see some of the other times we've done this session, and fill out the survey so we'll do more of what you want. I also want to thank our producer, Jack Frost, who helps make all these programs possible. And of course, our sponsor, Evertrue Studios, a division of Evertrue, for their continued support of the Philanthropy Mastermind series, now 850 episodes and going. And so if you want to know more about them, you can just fill that out in your survey as well. I'm sure they would love to hear from you, and we would love to have them continue sponsoring us. So anyway, enjoy all that, and join us again next Wednesday. We'll look forward to seeing you then. Until then, take care.
Thank you all.